this podcast is inspired by my students. So thank you everyone for inspiring this episode. Today's episode is going to be a little bit sensitive. I just want you to understand that this is not what I think. This is what most philosophers, psychologists think about the issue. I will try to have like a neutral stance on the issue. So I'm going to be asking certain questions and then try to give you like at least the best answer possible for that question, right? What I want you to do is listen to the podcast and then either reflect on those questions and maybe do also your own research. That way you can be maybe double check if what I said is correct or not. But I did my best. Let's dive in. So the question that we're going to talk about is just as old as humanity itself. What does it mean to be religious? And what does it mean to be spiritual? And how do we learn to accept people who aren't either? This is not just an intellectual puzzle. It is a deeply personal one. Because all of us, in one way or another, inherit a framework of belief. And here is the first big point. None of us start from zero. We're born into environments, families, cultures, and these environments give us a ready-made set of answers about God, morality, life, and death before we even learn how to tie our shoes. Now let's start with the first question. Are we religious because of our environment? The answer largely depends on who you ask. Sociologists like Peter Berger have argued that religion functions as a sacred canopy. That is, the environment into which you are born wraps you in a pre-structured meaning system. If you are born in India, chances are high that Hinduism or Islam sets your worldview. If you are born in Italy, Catholicism historically frames your moral imagination. If you grew up in a secular home in Scandinavia, you might be shaped more by humanist or atheistic traditions. This doesn't mean religion is fake. It means it is contextual. Just as we inherit language without choosing it, we often inherit religion without conscious decision. And yet, just as we can later learn new languages, we can also transform our inherent fate or even leave it behind. Psychologists like Erik Erikson noted that adolescence is the time where many people revisit the beliefs they were given. The environment plants the seed, but growth means asking, is this really mine? Or is this just what my parents handed me? Now, some philosophers like Nietzsche would take this further. He would say most people don't believe because they have reasoned it through. They believe because they were born into it. He was harsh about this, calling it herd mentality. But I'd soften that a bit, because there is also comfort and wisdom in inheriting tradition. It's not just about blind following. It's also about being part of a story bigger than yourself. Now, if the environment shapes us so much, do we ever truly choose religion? This is a tough one. On one hand, we are born into a world where our family, culture, and society handed us a ready-made identity, including our religion. In that sense, we don't choose, we inherit. A child raised in a Buddhist community in Japan or a Muslim family in Morocco doesn't wake up at age 3 and pick. The environment writes the script first. But philosophers push back here. Kierkegaard, for instance, argued that fate isn't real unless you choose it. He spoke of the leap of faith. The moment when you simply stop going through the motions of what you were taught and decide for yourself, whether that's embracing religion, rejecting it, or moving towards something more personal, like spirituality. Without that leap, he believes, belief is just a habit. With it, belief becomes authentic. Psychologists would add that identity formation always involves both nature and nurture. Yes, the environment sets the stage, but we still improvise. Some people double down on the religion they were born into, others drift away, and some reinvent it in their own way. So maybe the environment gives us the opening lines of a play, but eventually we face a choice. Do we keep performing the script we were handed? Do we rewrite parts of it to fit who we've become? Or do we walk off the stage entirely? That's where personal choice enters. Now, let's actually talk about something that is asked a lot: spirituality and religion. What is the difference between these two? This is a distinction we hear often today. People say, I am not religious, I am spiritual. But what does it mean really? To be religious usually means belonging to an organized tradition. You follow rituals, participate in communities, and align yourself with a body of beliefs that have been passed down for centuries. Religion is structured. It comes with calendars, rules, and institutions. It gives you not just faith, but identity. You are a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, a Hindu, a Buddhist. To be spiritual, on the other hand, is less about institutions and more about personal meaning. It can mean meditation, feeling connected to nature, exploring philosophy, or simply believing in something bigger without putting a label on it. Spirituality tends to value freedom. The authority sits inside you, not outside the tradition, meaning you choose. Now, famous philosophers Carl Jung would say spirituality is an essential part of your psyche. He believed humans have an innate drive toward transcendence, toward what he called self. Religion is one way to express this drive, but spirituality can do it too. But notice something here. The environment shapes both paths. If you grew up surrounded by strong religious institutions, you're more likely to inherit religion. If you grew up in a secular, individualistic culture, you're more likely to describe yourself as spiritual. Now, let's ask the question that most people ask. Why do tensions arise between believers and non-believers? Let's be honest here. Why is it so hard for religious people to accept those who aren't, and vice versa? The first answer is identity. Religion isn't just about God, it's about belonging. When someone rejects your religion, it can't feel like they are rejecting you, your family, your heritage. That's why disagreement about religion at the dinner table can feel more painful than a disagreement about politics or music. The second answer would be existential insecurity. Jean-Paul Sartre, famous existentialist, would argue that when someone chooses a path different from ours, it reminds us that our choice was not inevitable. If my neighbor is an atheist and I am a believer, their existence reminds me that belief is not the only path, and that can be threatening. The third answer would be power. Historically, religion has not only guided our souls, but also governed societies, laws, morality. Even kings and empires were legitimized through religion. So rejecting religion wasn't just private, it was destabilizing to the whole community. And we carry that memory in our cultures today. And the final answer would be fear. Fear of meaninglessness. The word has no meaning. Fear of that. Fear of being wrong. Religion, as Freud argued, answers some of our deepest anxieties. So when someone questions those answers, it can feel like they're shaking the ground beneath us. Now, what happens when your child refuses your religion? This is painful for many parents because religion is often tied to identity and legacy. It's not just about belief, it's about passing down heritage, culture, and moral values. When a child says, I don't believe, parents often hear, I don't belong to your story. I don't belong to your family. I don't belong. But here is where psychology helps. Developmental psychologist like Erickson tells us that adolescence is the stage of identity formation. Rebellion is not necessarily rejection. It is experimentation. Children test limits because that's how they grow into independent adults. If parents react with force, children often push harder in the opposite direction. If parents react with curiosity and love, children might actually stay open. Now let's go back to Kierkegaard. He says faith must be chosen. It cannot be inherited like property. If a child grows into belief authentically, it's real. If they are coerced, basically forced to do it, it's hollow. Kierkegaard warned against this. Christendom without Christ, empty ritual with no passion. You know, the idea of Muslims just by name. You're Muslim, but you don't actually practice or you don't understand your religion. That's what he's talking about. History also shows us families negotiating this tension. In multi-religious societies, children often converted for political or social reasons, and families had to adapt. Today, in a multicultural setting, compromise is common, introducing children to a tradition but giving them freedom later. So, what is the answer? Guide them, yes. Share your tradition, yes. But ultimately, let them choose. Because losing your child's love is a greater tragedy than losing their religious conformity. As Nietzsche once said, I might believe in a God if his followers looked more redeemed. In other words, live your values, show the beauty of your faith. This is the best way to inspire, not to impose. Now, our last question, how do we actually practice tolerance? Because most of you are born into a culture, maybe you move to a different country, and it is going to be a clash. You will see Christian, you will see Jews. So how do you actually practice that tolerance? First, tolerance requires humility. Socrates famously said, the only true wisdom is knowing you know nothing. If I accept my knowledge of the divine is partial, I can accept that someone else's path might also hold truth. Tolerance requires empathy. Psychologically, it means separating identity from belief. I can say I don't share your faith, but I respect your humanity and your right to believe. That's the difference between disagreement and disrespect. Tolerant works best when it's built into our systems. History gives us examples like the Ottoman Empire's millet system, where different religious groups lived under one political umbrella but governed themselves, or modern secular democracies, where the state protects freedom of belief. So tolerance is not just an attitude. It's also a structure. It's personal humility, emotional empathy, and institutional fairness all working together. All right, everybody. Hopefully today's podcast was insightful and you learned something from it. Thank you for listening, and bye.